That's a way to use your head. It's Soccer Saturday on The Fan.
Welcome back. It is Soccer Saturday on 93.5 and 107.5 The Fan. We're about to wrap up the fourth World Cup cycle that this show has been a part of. We began in March of 2014 with the Indy 11 beginning later in the month of April. So you can do the math quickly, 14, 18, 22, and 26. And if there is one thing I have learned when there are World Cups, that's a good time to release new books about soccer. The one that I literally happen to have in my hand as we speak is entitled American Soccer Nation, the remarkable 150-year history of Yanks on a roll from mob football to the modern game. Mark Franek is the author, and he joins us now. Mark, good morning. Thanks for the time. How are you today?
Great, Greg, and good morning, listeners.
Well, all right. Before I get to the book, which you did a tremendous job on, I was able to pour through it last weekend. It was a very easy read. You have a unique job in terms as an educator, but in a school that is tied into the Philadelphia Union. Please explain.
The school that I teach is called YSC Academy. YSC doesn't stand for anything, but it's the name of an independent school that is independent and fully certified by the Pennsylvania Association of Independent Schools. But it is embedded within the Philadelphia Union. So it's essentially an embedded high school that works in tandem with the academy to produce about a dozen college-bound, students every year and several pros. And it's been in existence now going on about 13 years. So imagine if you're a high school teacher, an English teacher like me, and for 50 years of your life, you've been following soccer and playing soccer, and you went to college, and all your vacations have been organized around soccer. And then you get this job, and you not only get to teach what you want, the high school kids, but you're embedded with about 80 alpha males who are applying their trade and trying to go pro. It is a glorious job.
Go ahead. I'm sorry, I cut you off.
No. So it's a high school, but it's not a normal high school, right? It doesn't look like any of the high schools that most of our listeners have been to.
All right. So, again, I gave the reason for timing of when you released the book, but that there's still an overall, and clearly I can tell your passion for the sport in that first answer. But why take on this task to try to educate the masses as to the history of this sport in our nation?
Well, it actually started as a classroom project 4 years ago when I got hired at the school. The head of school said, Mark, in addition to your 5 English classes that we want you to teach, I want you to design a history of U.S. soccer class because we're graduating some pros every year and some wonderful student athletes that are going on to college. But frankly, we discovered that they don't know much about their own history. So in addition to paying me for my normal job, now they're paying me to develop a class on soccer. So that's how the book started. It started as a classroom project where I first read the existing books that were out there, found most of them to be dull, relatively fragmented because they're not going to cover the entire history. They may cover the NASL, they may cover the first epoch of the MLS, but they're not really covering the entire scope of soccer in America. And frankly, they were quite boring. And after trying to teach them or chapters from them to my 14 or 15-year-olds, they pushed back. And I said, heck, let me start to write my own. And that started this 3-year saga to write a foundational, more positive book about the history of soccer on American soil.
I will try to keep this in chronological order on these questions as best I can. But let's start with one of the phrases I use that's on the cover of your book, mob football. This has nothing to do with Jimmy Hoffa nor Al Capone. Explain what mob football is.
Yeah, mob football goes back hundreds of years, perhaps 2,000 years at least, and it's primarily describes pre-soccer activity, primarily in the British Isles, but essentially it existed almost everywhere human beings coexisted with a round ball, whether it was in town or in fields. And the general idea of mob football, again, primarily a British Isles phenomenon, but a ball would be thrown into a throng of people. And that throng of people is usually divided into 2 teams. various different rules about who was on what team. Sometimes it depended on what part of town you were born in. Sometimes it depended on your gender and your age and whatnot. In any case, the idea was to grab the ball and move the ball by any means necessary from wherever the ball was caught into an object, literally to touch it to an object or get it to the sea or get it to the church wall. And of course, you can imagine mob football is just what it meant. It was basically a throng and a mob, a moving mob of people. And you would sometimes kick the ball more often than not. You were literally fighting and wrestling with the ball in your hands. You tried to move it from one person or one group of people, one phalanx of people to another. And the way you scored was to get it to your own object, kind of like a reverse capture the flag mob football type endeavor.
So again, that's kind of the origin of the sport that we see now around the globe. And Mark did a great job early in the book of saying, all right, here's kind of a brief snippet of the origins of the sport in Great Britain, because that is obviously what eventually then made its way to here. So I realize I'm giving a Cliff Notes freeze-dried version of this, given the time that we have allotted for our conversation. I work in both types of football. You delineate by calling it gridiron football or gridiron in the book. But for example, I work for both the Indianapolis Colts and the Indy 11. So I know that about 5 or 6 years ago, we were celebrating this 150th anniversary of American football. First game played between Rutgers and Princeton. And in this book, you say that really that was a lot more like soccer than football, correct?
Yeah, so without going down this rabbit hole, let's be brief. The game that you're talking about, it can't be called true soccer, nor can it be called true gridiron, because neither sport existed at the time. We're basically in this proto-soccer, proto-rugby time period when this contest occurred. And the football folks, the NFL folks, the gridiron folks, they like to point to this particular event, and they like to call it the birth of American gridiron football. It's a little bit of a stretch. It's a stretch. It was more like a soccer rugby game, if you will. You could catch the ball, but the only way you were going to score in that particular event was to kick it over a line and to move it mostly with your feet and sometimes with your arms. So again, it can't really truly be described as, quote, the birthplace of soccer, nor can it be described as the birthplace of gridiron. What it really was a prototypical game involving mob football as it was moving towards some organized play at the colleges in the Northeast, if it makes sense. But sure, if the NFL and gridiron football want to call it their origin, that's fine. It's not something anybody's going to lose sleep over because, frankly, nobody knows exactly what the activity looked like. It was quasi-mob. It certainly had a round ball, not an oval ball. You certainly had to move it. Sometimes you could catch it. Sometimes you were getting tackled literally with the arms. Other times you were getting tackled with feet. But it was one of those really weird and wonderful events that started happening on the East Coast of colleges as they were trying to regulate and put down rules in a rule book so they could figure out what game they were going to play when they met the next week or the next month.
I also learned American Soccer Nation is the book. Mark Franek is the author, joining us here on Soccer Saturday on 93.5 and 107.5 The Fan. I also learned in the book the reason why college football got quickly a leg up over college soccer. It was basically Harvard's fault. Is that an accurate statement?
Yeah, I mean, we can blame it on Harvard. The brief story there for the listeners is there were several colleges on the East Coast back in the late 1860s and early 1870s that were trying to figure out what type of game they were going to play. Each school had their own version that they played on campus. But this created a problem. If Princeton was going to play Rutgers was going to play Penn, Yale was going to play Harvard. Well, okay, you get in your horse and buggy and your horse or a train and you go to the away field. Well, what game are you going to play? There's no internet. There's no rules published in a rule book at the time. So they had to decide, well, what rules are we going to play? And at the time, Harvard started playing a more rugby-like activity. They looked north to Canada and McGill University. Mm-hmm. And the Harvardians were much more excited about catching the ball, moving it with their hands, and running and tackling in these scrum-like pockets that was pre-rugby, which would be pre-gridiron, but it was still more of a gridiron, whereas the Princetonians, if you will, were more apt to follow the kicking game. Kick the ball, trap it with your legs, move it to another person using proto-soccer. So different colleges were moving in different directions, but the Harvidians carried the most weight on the East Coast at the time. In whichever direction the Harvidians went, it would pull the other colleges in that direction. And they chose rugby, if you will, proto-rugby, as their archetype. And in a sense, soccer spelled the death knell for soccer on college campuses for the next several decades. And soccer's been playing catch-up ever since.
Couple of I wouldn't say quick things, couple more things we'll let you go. I'm frankly, for the purposes of again, time, from the NASL days till now, I'm going to kind of ignore that for the conversation. Trust me, it is not ignored in the book. It is a comprehensive look from the conversation we've been having all up until the modern day. And I have a little bit of knowledge from, again, my, role with the Indy 11. When we first jumped to the USL Championship, one of our common opponents would be the Bethlehem Steel, which honors, again, now Philadelphia Union 2, but honored the legacy of soccer in the 20s and 30s in eastern Pennsylvania. And one of the things that struck me about this book was the amount of professional soccer and when it was played before we hit the Great Depression. The floor is yours. Take it and run with that where you will.
Yeah, well, first off, congratulations to the Indy 11, both the fan base, the wonderful fan base that your region identifies with, and it's getting better every year. And good stuff to all the investors in the USL, the 25 teams, and the changes that are afoot on the USL side. Bravo to the modern Indy 11. Let's go back and briefly talk about what was going on in America from 1921 to 1931. Very few people, even those who love soccer, don't know that there was a fully functioning professional league on the East Coast of the United States, roughly from Bethlehem, Philadelphia area, on up to Newark, New Jersey, Kearny, New Jersey, Brooklyn, New York City, out into Pawtucket, Rhode Island, and then the whole way up to Falls River and then Boston. That corridor, that 200-mile, I think it was 200 to 300-mile corridor, had roughly 10 to 14 teams during that decade that were functioning as a professional league. There were sometimes as many as 10, and occasionally for final games, for cup games, 15,000 fans, mostly working class, heavy immigrant population that would turn out to watch these teams play, including this tiny little town in Bethlehem, about an hour and a half by horse and buggy or early model car in the 1920s north of Philadelphia. So imagine that. I mean, gosh, if there's ever a film to be made, it would be remarkable to look at this league that was rivaling baseball for the amount of eyeballs. This is pre-NFL, before they got going, pre-NBA, and everybody's pre except for the baseball people. Wonderful league, and a lot of fans and a lot of eyeballs, and it was one of the better leagues in the world at the time before it got knocked out pretty much by an internal soccer battle in the Great Depression in 1929.
Folks, all of this is contained in the book American Soccer Nation. It covers a lot of history, but frankly, it's very readable. I knocked this out over the course of the weekend. I would highly encourage you to do the same. Mark, I assume simply where books are found is where people can find a copy of said tome?
Sure, anywhere books are sold.
All right, Mark, again, thank you so much for the time and the copy of the book. I enjoyed the conversation. Appreciate your time.
Thank you, listeners.